Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com, and this is anti-war news for Wednesday, November 16th, 2022. First story at the top of antiwar.com. President Biden says it's unlikely that a missile that landed in Poland was fired from Russia. So the big news on Tuesday was that a missile, or maybe two missiles, some reports say two, some reports say one, landed in Poland near the Ukrainian border and killed two people. Now, this is the sort of escalation, we've been warning about, that this war could spill over outside of Ukraine into NATO territory, and then that raises all sorts of questions about escalation. But it looks like it was not fired by Russia, and this is what President Biden said. So he said this on Wednesday morning in Indonesia, where he is for the G20 summit. Um, So this is what Biden told reporters. He said that there's preliminary information that indicates otherwise. He said, quote, "There is preliminary information that contests that. I don't want to say until we completely investigate. It's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia," end quote. So while he was in Indonesia, he held an emergency meeting of NATO and G7 leaders that are also there for the summit over the news that this missile fell in Poland. He said that the allies agreed to find out exactly what happened and then to make a decision together from there. So over in Poland, President Andrzej Duda, he told reporters that there's no clear evidence of who fired the missile. He said, quote, "We do not for the moment have unequivocal evidence of who fired the missile. An investigation is ongoing," end quote. Duda did say that the missile was likely Russian made, but that doesn't mean much because Ukraine's armed forces use a lot of older Russian made equipment, Soviet made equipment, including S-300 air defense systems. And the munition landed in Poland as Russia was launching massive missile strikes on energy infrastructure across Ukraine. They really bombarded Ukraine on Tuesday. And the reports say that it was the biggest Russian missile strikes across Ukraine of the war since February 24th. So very significant missile strikes were going on while this happened. But Duda, there was a lot of concern when this first broke because the Polish have been very hawkish against Russia, and they want a bigger NATO presence in their country. They want to host nuclear weapons, but it looks like he's not looking to escalate the situation. Duda said that he believes it was an isolated incident and that he does not expect more missiles to hit Polish territory. And just, on Twitter and stuff, I saw some reports, people showing pictures of fragments at the scene, saying it looks like an S-300 from the S-300 air defense systems. And if that's the case, it's likely Ukraine because they don't have the range to come from Russia. But none of that's confirmed. It's all, I don't know enough by looking at the fragments and the even like Russian media that I check. I haven't seen anything on there about it. So we still don't really know exactly what happened. Another possibility I saw was that it could have been Ukraine's air defenses hit a missile and then it ended up landing in Poland. I mean, it was very close to the border. So Poland is considering holding consultations with NATO members under Article 4 of the alliance's treaty. So NATO's Article 4 states, quote, "The parties will consult together whenever any of them have the opinion that the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any party is threatened," end quote. So that means, they're going to hold talks on what threat Poland is facing or what this kind of means. Maybe. They haven't said yet that they're going to call these consultations. And, since Poland, again, since they're a NATO member, there's been concern that they might ask to invoke Article 5, which states that an armed attack on any party is an attack on them all. But so far, again, there's no sign that Poland's looking to escalate the situation, and there's no evidence that Russia launched the missile. And it looks like even if it was Russian, they didn't do it deliberately. I think that's pretty clear. When news of the missile landing, but this is where things get a little funny, because when the news first broke, a U.S. official told the Associated Press that Russian missiles hit Polish territory. And the first report of this was, Russian missiles strike Poland. But when asked about the situation pretty shortly after that, the Pentagon said that it could not corroborate the claim, and Russia issued a strong denial. They said that they The reports were intentionally trying to escalate the situation and that they did not launch any strikes in that border area. But the lack of evidence, it has not stopped Ukrainian officials from accusing Russia of hitting Poland. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, he said on Twitter that he spoke with Duda and expressed condolences over the death of Polish citizens from what he called Russian missile terror. And there was other Ukrainian officials also jumping on it and saying that Russia attacked Poland. Um, but so far, right now, as of early Wednesday morning over in Indonesia, I guess it's a little later there now, but it looks like things aren't just going to escalate right away from this. But it really does highlight the danger of just this whole situation. I mean, how quickly it could spiral into something major. All right, the next one here. So this is just a report about Russia denying the missile strike. I'll just read the quote from the Russian Defense Ministry that they put out, and this I didn't see reported anywhere in Western media for hours and hours. I tried to get it up pretty quick, and I tweeted it out because it was. But the article was from TASS, which is a Russian news agency, and then Twitter put the label on it, warning it's Russian state affiliated media. So if people wanted to even like it or retweet it, they would get this warning, like, you sure about that? And it's so ridiculous because in my tweet, it's clear, it's a statement from the Russian government. Who cares if it's from Russian state affiliated media? I mean, it's a silly label anyway, but the fact that they put it on a tweet clearly saying that this is what Russia is saying, it's just so stupid. But anyway, so this is a quote from the Russian Defense Ministry. They said, quote, Polish media reports and official statements about the alleged fall of Russian missiles near the Polish settlement of Prewodo, I probably said that wrong, that's the Russian village that they hit, are a deliberate provocation aimed at escalating tensions. The Russian military has conducted no strikes at targets close to the Ukrainian-Polish state border, end quote. So yeah, they're denying it. And then I saw the Kremlin again. They said that they have no information on it. But the next story here, this is not good news. The White House has asked Congress for $37.7 billion in new Ukraine aid. So the White House requested on Tuesday for Congress to approve this new Ukraine aid, and this would bring total U.S. spending on this war to about $105 billion. And I think my math is right there. So far, they've authorized about $67 billion. This would bring it up over $105 billion. Just an incredible amount of money that they're spending on this. And according to The Hill, the request includes $21.7 billion in military aid for Ukraine, and that would also go toward replenishing U.S. military stockpiles that have been sent to the country. It also includes a total of $14.5 billion in budgetary aid to directly fund the Ukrainian government. And that is, Ukraine is expecting the U.S. and its allies to pay to cover its budget deficit for 2023, which is about $38 billion. And I think they expect the U.S. to give a total of $18 billion. So they might want a little more than this. It says that the request also includes $626 million for the U.S. strategic oil reserve that the president has been taking a lot of oil from, and for nuclear safety for Ukraine, and also $900 million for healthcare and other services for Ukrainians. So the request comes ahead of the swearing in of the new Congress in January. Republicans are expected to hold the majority in the House once all midterm elections have been called. I should have double checked before I recorded if they've called more races, but it looks like the Republicans are going to control the House. And Kevin McCarthy, who's currently the minority leader in the House, he has clinched the GOP nomination to be the House Speaker. McCarthy, although he's been a staunch supporter of arming Ukraine and spending all this money on the war, he did raise concerns among Ukraine supporters when he said that a Republican-controlled House would not write a blank check for Ukraine. So while the majority of Republicans still support spending on the war, McCarthy's comments, they could have prompted the White House to make this request during the lame duck period. And there were some reports saying that this was going to happen because of what McCarthy said. But I mean, it seems like this could have been the plan all along too. And it's always possible Congress might increase this number. I believe it was an NBC News report that said they were going to try to pass a Ukraine aid bill before January. They said they want it to be roughly 50 billion. So Congress might turn around and say, well, you could have 45 billion, 50 billion. And they did this before. The $40 billion Ukraine aid bill that they passed, I believe the White House only asked for, I shouldn't say only asked for, because they asked for something like 33 billion, and then Congress upped it to 40. And this is a pattern that is happening now. This is going on with the military budget. Both of Biden's requests for the annual military spending bills have been significantly increased by Congress. They just want to spend on this war and other military stuff. All right, the next one here. So this is from the New York Times, and look at this title: Western allies look to Ukraine as a testing ground for weapons. And I'm actually going to switch to their original story because this is the archive. So we put up archived versions of stories from websites that have paywalls so people can read it. But they did change the headline a little bit. I guess that one was a little too much. It says, for Western weapons, the Ukraine war is a beta test. I guess that sounds pretty bad too. But so this New York Times report reads, 3 months ago, as Ukrainian troops were struggling to advance against Russian forces in the south, the military's headquarters in Kiev quietly deployed a valuable new weapon to the battlefield. It was not a rocket launcher, cannon, or another kind of heavy arms from Western allies. Instead, it was a real-time information system known as Delta, an online network that military troops, civilian officials, and even vetted bystanders could use to track and share desperately needed details about Russian forces. The software, developed in coordination with NATO, had barely been tested in battle. But as they moved across the Kherson region in a major counteroffensive, Ukraine's forces employed Delta, as well as powerful weaponry supplied by the West, to push the Russians out of towns and villages they had occupied for months. Delta is one example of how Ukraine has become a testing ground for state-of-the-art weapons and information systems and new ways to use them that Western political officials and military commanders predict could shape warfare for generations to come. The battle for Ukraine, to be sure, remains largely a grinding war of attrition with relentless artillery attacks and other World War II-era tactics. Both sides primarily rely on Soviet-era weapons, and Ukraine has reported running low on ammunition for them. But even as traditional warfare is underway, new advances in technology and training in Ukraine are being closely monitored for the ways they are changing the face of the fight. Beyond Delta, they include remote-controlled boats, anti-drone weapons known as Sky Wipers, and an updated version of an air defense system built in Germany that the German military itself has yet to use. So Ukraine's vice prime minister and minister of digital transformation says that Ukraine is the best test ground and that they have the opportunity to test all these weapons. He said this at a NATO conference in Virginia. So Ukraine's defense minister previously said this too a few months back. He told his message to Western arms makers was, send us what you got. Use us as a testing ground. And that's what is going on here. And the thing about the remote controlled boats is they mentioned the attack on Russia's Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, Crimea, which used remote controlled boats. Ukraine hasn't officially taken credit for it, but it's pretty clear that it was them. And now, so I talk about China a lot and how kind of that's the big one that I think is coming. And this says that the use of remote controlled boats could particularly become important, military experts said, showing how warfare at sea might play out as the United States and its allies brace for potential future naval aggressions by China in the East and South China Seas and against Taiwan. So this is all about, preparing for future war with, Russia, but as well as China. So it's pretty concerning. And, that's how I think they view Ukraine, as just a testing ground and a place where they could hurt Russia. All right, the next one here, the G20 struggles to reach a consensus on Ukraine. So at the Group of 20 summit in Bali, Indonesia, members are struggling to reach a consensus on the war in Ukraine. The US and its Western allies are pushing for a condemnation of Russia and a joint statement, but that is extremely unlikely as Russia is a member of G20, and so are other countries reluctant to condemn Moscow, including China. So there's this draft statement that's been circulating, because usually at these summits they release a joint statement at the end. At the last G21, that it was their foreign ministers back in the summer, they failed to reach a joint statement again because of the war in Ukraine. But this one that the U.S. has been circulating, condemns the Russia for the war in Ukraine, but it does say that there are differing views among members. But still, I mean, that's not Russia's never going to approve that. And Lavrov pretty much said that. He said they're trying to politicize the statement. Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. And, it goes to show, because G20 is made up of what are considered, the world's leading economies and developing nations. And there's a lot of G20 members that have not gone along with the US. The G7 is a different story, but the G20, they haven't gone along. And that includes Indonesia, the host, Brazil, South Africa, India, and of course, China. And when you could put these countries together, I mean, they're the biggest, that's a huge amount of people that live in the world. China obviously has the largest population than India, but Brazil and Indonesia, they're both way up there. So, this narrative that the whole world is, siding with the U.S. against Russia just isn't true. All right, the next one here. So Zelensky addressed the G20 virtually, and he told them not to ask Ukraine to compromise to reach a peace deal with Russia. He referred to the group as the G19 in a snub aimed at Russia, and Ukraine has been calling for Russia to be kicked out of G20, like they were kicked out of the G7, which used to be the G8. But so this is what Zelensky told the summit. He said, quote, Ukraine should not be offered to conclude compromises with its conscious sovereignty, territory, and independence. We respect the rules, and we are people of the world, of our word, people of our word, end quote. So Zelensky said that there would be no Minsk III, referring to the Minsk I and II agreements that failed to end the civil war in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. So the war in the Donbass was sparked by the U.S.-backed 2014 coup in Kiev that ousted former President Viktor Yanukovych. In response to the change in power, separatists in the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts of the Donbass declared independence from Kiev, and Ukraine didn't let them go, and the war started. Under the Minsk agreements that were brokered by France and Germany, Kiev agreed to cede autonomy to the Donbass separatists, but the territory would still remain part of Ukraine. There was other aspects of the deal, but that was the main, thing there. But it was never fully implemented. The war went on. It was a stalemate for a while, and it really ramped up right before the February 24th invasion by Russia. And in response to Zelensky's speech, the Kremlin said that his comments that there would be no Minsk III show that he is not serious about negotiating. And Zelensky's speech came after Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has come out in favor of diplomacy, saying that this winter provides an opportunity. But other members of the Biden administration, Blinken, Sullivan, they don't agree with Milley, and the U.S. has reportedly assured Ukraine that peace talks with Russia don't need to happen. There's been more talk of diplomacy since Russia withdrew from Kherson, but Ukrainian officials still say they want to expel Russia from all the territory it has captured, including Crimea. All right. The next one here, U.S. sanctions on China's likely next defense minister may complicate dialogue. So following the Biden-Xi summit, the U.S. and China said that they're going to continue, communications, and that will include more military communications, as some of them have been suspended. China suspended some of them in response to Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan. But this is according to a report from the South China Morning Post. The U.S. has sanctions on the likely incoming defense minister, the incoming Chinese defense minister, and this could really complicate their plans to resume military dialogues. And it goes to show, the U.S. overreach when it comes to its sanctions, targeting high-level government officials in countries that they trade with and do have dialogue with. So China's current defense minister, Wei Feng, he is expected to represent Beijing in the upcoming military talks. He's likely going to speak with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin pretty soon. But Wei is going to be replaced in March, and his likely replacement, Li Shangfu, is under U.S. sanctions. The Post report said that China is going to bring up the issue of the sanctions on Li in talks between Wei and Austin. The U.S. imposed sanctions on Li in 2018 over China's purchase of Russian Su-35 combat jets and S-400 defense missile systems. At the time of that purchase, he was serving as the head of China's Equipment Development Department, which oversees military procurements and stuff like that. So the U.S. targeted Li and this department with sanctions using the 2017 Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. And the U.S. also invoked this to sanction Turkey for purchasing S-400s. And that's a thorny issue between the U.S. and Turkey. So these sanctions on Li, they could really be a test of how serious President Biden is about maintaining communications with Beijing. And he said, Austin and Jake Sullivan, they're going to be speaking with their Chinese counterparts soon. But, when the U.S. puts sanctions on a person or a country, it's usually very difficult for them to get lifted. A lot of China hawks in Congress will probably really oppose this move. And I doubt that Biden has the political will really to kind of go against them and lift the sanctions anyway. But we'll see what happens with this. But again, it just really shows how sanction happy the U.S. is, that they could end up, China could end up with a defense minister that's under U.S. sanctions. And it shows how the dynamic has changed. Under Trump, that's when the U.S. really started sanctioning Chinese officials. And Biden has ramped up the sanctions and economic and trade war against China. All right, the next one here, this is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Senator Cruz, Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, he slams the investigation into the murder of an American journalist. And that Palestinian-American journalist is Shireen Abu Akleh. So Israel has said that the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice, is investigating her death, and they are not happy about it. Benny Gantz, the defense minister, and Yair Lapid, the prime minister, they have both come out against it. And Senator Cruz has echoed Gantz's attacks on the inquiry. Cruz said, quote, Joe Biden and his administration view Israel and Prime Minister-elect Benjamin Netanyahu as political enemies, and so they are responding to them the way they respond to all their political enemies, by unleashing the FBI. Our allies Israel have, since the very beginning, cooperated closely with the United States in investigating this incident, and the State Department and Defense Department had already drawn their conclusions, end quote. So really, what he's saying there isn't exactly true, because there has been, Israel basically investigated itself. They said, oh yeah, it seems like an Israeli soldier might have killed her, but it was an accident. We're not going to investigate it any further. They were returning fire. There was a gun battle in the area, but all of that turns out, according to other investigations, not to be true. And it does look like it was a targeted killing. Cruz is just coming out here for Israel. And, you would think with all the military aid we give them, they would at least, make their unhappiness over this situation known privately instead of coming out publicly like this. But that's it for the news. We have a lot of good viewpoints as always. Actually, we have one that is kind of a news story from the Cradle, that Iran has not sentenced to death 15,000 protesters. So there was this story that was going around in Western media that Iran's parliament voted to put to death 15,000 protesters. But I remember I saw it like earlier this month, and I just saw it on Iran International, which is a just so people know that's not a trustworthy site. It's Saudi, I believe they're Saudi funded, and I know an Israeli reporter for Axios. I don't know if he's Israeli himself, but he covers Israel. He said that Mossad uses this outlet, Iran International, to put out as part of its information war. So I saw it there, and I didn't think much of it. But then Newsweek wrote something up about it, and then just this week I saw kind of a flurry of these posts, but it's not true. It's based on this letter that 227 Iranian lawmakers signed, um, urging severe punishments for those involved in the protests, what they are calling riots. And there has been one protester sentenced to death, it looks like, so far. So it's not, but it's just this story that I've just seen a lot of people post this. Oh, Iran's going to kill 15,000 protesters, and it's just not true. And people need to be aware of all the misinformation that is out there. And the 15,000, that's just an estimate of how many protesters they have locked up. So I don't know if that number is right. Who knows? But anyway, other viewpoints we have one from Ted Snyder. Is this the time for peace? It is titled, and it's about all the talks and stuff. One from Doug Bandow about U.S.-China relations. One from Caitlin Johnstone about how Zelensky and George W. Bush are going to give a joint pro-war presentation. Bush is going to try to convince Republicans, why it's so important to keep supporting Ukraine. But yeah, that's it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Hopefully, this situation with the missile hitting Poland just settles down. There's not a big escalation, but you could support the show, antiwar.com/donate. If you want to support the show in a fun way, you could buy a t-shirt or a coffee mug or something like that in the link in the description. And subscribe on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble if you want the video. Download the audio wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with your friends and put it out there. That really helps out a lot too. But thanks for listening. I'll talk to you tomorrow.